Okay, let's unpack this. The clock is ticking, literally, for American tech giants.
Yeah.
By Monday, June 30th, 2025, they're looking at handing over billions, billions with a B, to Canada.
Hmm.
And what makes this so dramatic, really, is that the U.S. president just slammed the brakes on all trade talks with Canada, effective immediately, over this exact issue.
Yeah, it's quite something.
So for you, listening in, here's where it gets, well, really interesting. Canada, key U.S. ally, our largest trading partner,
Right.
seems to be squarely in the penalty box, as the president put it, all over a digital tax.
And our mission here in this deep dive is really to cut through those headlines. We want to understand not just what's happening between these traditionally very close allies,
Right.
why it's happening now, what's actually at stake, and how this sort of technical-sounding tax issue,
Yeah, it sounds dry, doesn't it? Tax issue.
it does, but how it could potentially unleash, well, chaos across the border. We'll be digging into the details from the sources we've looked at, trying to give you that complete picture.
Okay, let's jump right in then. The heart of it, this Canadian Digital Services Tax, the DST. What exactly is it, and why is it causing such a reaction from the U.S.?
Well, at its core, it's a 3% tax. Canada's put it on revenue that businesses earn from certain digital activities.
Like what kind of activity?
Things like online advertising, selling user data, revenue streams from digital marketplaces. And the crucial part, the real sticking point, is that it applies even if the company's headquarters isn't in Canada.
Ah, okay, so it's about where the users are, where the money's made.
Exactly. And from the U.S. perspective, the government sees this as, well, unfairly targeted.
Hmm.
Targeted specifically at American companies, the big names, Google, Apple, Amazon.
And the president called it a blatant attack.
He did. Those were his words. Blatant attack. So very strong language.
That's fascinating. So it's not just the tax, it's who it hits, these giant, mostly American tech firms. And you mentioned Canada isn't necessarily alone here. Other countries are doing similar things.
You've hit on a really key point there. Canada is definitely not an outlier. We're seeing countries all over the world exploring or implementing similar DSTs. It's this broader trend of governments trying to capture tax revenue from these huge global digital companies that play a massive role in their economies.
Right, because traditional tax rules maybe weren't built for this kind of business.
Precisely. And the president has actually singled out Europe, too. Called their taxes very nasty.
Okay, but here's a twist then. He called out Europe, but our sources say trade talks with the EU aren't being halted.
That's the interesting detail, yeah. Europe faces similar criticism, but negotiations continue. It sort of highlights that while this is a global phenomenon, the U.S. response isn't necessarily uniform. It's, well, targeted in its own way, perhaps.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? Old tax systems struggling to keep up with the digital age. And the money involved here isn't small change. What's the immediate financial hit? The figures I saw looked pretty significant.
They are significant, absolutely. So the tax has actually been in place since last year, but the first payments are due this coming Monday, June 30th.
And it's retroactive.
That's the kicker. It is retroactive. So American companies are looking at handing over roughly $2.7 billion.
Wow. $2.7 billion, just like that.
Just like that. And what's really fascinating here, maybe the key thing for you to grasp, is that this isn't just about Canada collecting money. This specific fight, it's setting a huge precedent. How do countries deal with economic sovereignty when value is created digitally across borders?
It's like a test case.
Exactly. A test case for, who gets to tax a click, who owns that virtual space, tax-wise.
Who taxes a click?
Yeah.
I like that framing. It sounds like there was an attempt at a bigger solution, though, a multilateral one. Something about the Group of Seven. What happened there?
Yeah, there was. The G7 agreement on corporate taxation. It was meant to be this big step towards sorting out global tax issues, but it crucially didn't extend to cover these digital services taxes specifically.
Ah, so it left a gap.
It left a big gap. And that failure, really, to get everyone on the same page about DSTs, well, it kind of set the stage for these one-on-one fights. Without that global consensus, countries like Canada feel they have the right, maybe even the need, to go it alone and collect this levy.
Okay, so billions due Monday, no global agreement in place. How did the U.S. actually react when this deadline started looming large?
The reaction was swift and pretty blunt.
How so?
The U.S. president immediately terminated all trade talks with Canada, just stopped them, said effective immediately.
Wow. Okay, no warning.
Seemingly very sudden. And he didn't just stop there. He also promised to tell Canada within 7 days about new duties, New tariffs they will be paying, in his words, to do business with the United States.
That's a serious threat. And Canada already has some tariffs slapped on it, right? From before.
That's right. It's not like trade is completely free right now anyway. Canada already faces a 25% tariff on, well, pretty much all its exports to the U.S., except for things covered by that specific U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement.
Right.
And on top of that, there's a hefty 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum exports.
So this is piling on top of existing measures.
Exactly. And you hear the president's rhetoric, we have all cards, we have every single one, or saying, economically, we have such power over Canada. It really shows he sees this as pure economic leverage.
Which raises a big question, doesn't it? How does that confidence, that assertion of power, actually play out for both economies, especially with tariffs already in place?
It's the key question. Does the leverage work as intended, or does it cause unintended damage?
And it feels like such a sudden reversal. Because just recently, things seemed to be looking up, didn't they? The relationship felt like it was improving after Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, came in.
It really did seem that way.
Weren't they supposed to be close to a new trade deal? Maybe by July 20th?
That was the talk, yes.
Mm.
They had a long meeting, apparently, at the G7 summit in Alberta just earlier this month. And reports describe the atmosphere as, seemingly friendly, positive signs.
Positive signs, friendly atmosphere, and then suddenly, bam. Friday, the president says Canada's back in the penalty box.
Exactly. Whiplash is probably a good word for it.
How has Canada responded to this? To being put in the penalty box?
Well, officially, Canadian officials haven't said much. No comment on whether PM Carney will call the president or if they might, rethink the digital tax.
Okay.
But the Prime Minister's office did put out a statement. Pretty standard stuff, really. Said his government would continue to engage in these complex negotiations in the best interests of Canadian workers and businesses.
So basically holding firm but keeping the door open for talks.
Seems to be the message, yes. Keep talking, protect Canadian interests.
Still, it feels like weeks, maybe months of diplomatic effort just kind of undone in one announcement. Makes you wonder about the stability there in what's usually seen as a very stable partnership.
It definitely raises questions about predictability, doesn't it?
But let's broaden out a bit. Is it only this digital services tax causing friction, or are there other issues bubbling under the surface?
Oh, you're absolutely right to ask that. If you connect the dots, look at the bigger picture. The DST is maybe the flashpoint now, but it's not the only issue. There's a history here, even recently.
Like what?
Well, the president has complained before about Canada's dairy sector, barriers for American farmers.
Ah, yes, the dairy issue. That comes up a lot.
It does, and also the banking sector. Concerns about access for American companies there, too.
Okay, so dairy, banking, anything else? Our sources mentioned some, let's say, less conventional ideas.
A slight chuckle.
Yeah.
Yes, the more. Unusual proposals. He has sort of flirted, as one source put it, with the idea of Canada just becoming the 51st U.S. state.
Right, I remember that. How did that go down in Canada? Predictably, I imagine.
Predictably badly, yes. Canadian officials have consistently rejected that idea, to put it very mildly.
I bet. And wasn't there something about an air defense system? The Golden Dome?
Yes, another interesting one, an offer to include Canada in this proposed air defense system. In exchange for, I think the figure was $71 billion.
$71 billion, wow.
So yeah, dairy, banking, statehood, defense systems, it's a mix.
But does this fit a pattern, this current situation with the DST threat? Does it align with how the president typically negotiates on trade?
It does seem to fit a pattern we've seen before. This isn't the first time the president has announced, imminent dramatic plans to penalize countries with high tariffs.
Only to back down later.
Sometimes, yes. Especially if the markets react badly, get panicked about trade disruptions. Remember recently he announced sky-high tariffs, these reciprocal rates on basically everyone.
Oh yeah, that caused a stir.
Huge stir. But then he suspended them pretty quickly back in early April. And we've seen hints of flexibility on other trade deal deadlines, too.
So the threat itself is part of the negotiation tactic.
It certainly seems that way.
Yeah.
Understanding this specific fight with Canada really means looking at that broader context. The president's overall trade strategy, his past actions, threats often come before more talks, or sometimes reversals.
So the question becomes, what are the stakes this time? If he doesn't back down? If these new tariffs actually happen?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Our sources use pretty strong language. One said it could unleash chaos on both sides of the border. What stands out to you as the biggest immediate risk?
I think the most immediate impact, the thing people would feel first, is probably on the U.S. side, actually.
Oh. How so?
U.S. companies and U.S. consumers could really bear the brunt of higher import costs. Things coming in from Canada suddenly get more expensive.
Right. So inflation, potentially. Higher prices at the store.
That's certainly a risk.
Mhm.
And we did see the financial markets react, didn't we? They dipped a bit when the news broke about talks halting.
But they recovered.
They did recover, yeah.
Yeah.
The S&P 500 actually hit a new high on Friday.
Yeah.
So the market isn't panicking yet.
Yeah.
Yet. But make no mistake, if significant new tariffs are imposed, the ripple effects could be widespread
Hmm.
across both economies, affecting everything from, your grocery bill to major corporate investment plans.
So let's recap. We've got Canada's digital services tax aimed at big tech, mostly U.S. companies. It's triggered this major trade dispute, billions of dollars due Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And it's threatening to derail what looked like a recovering relationship between the U.S. and Canada,
Yeah.
potentially causing real economic pain on both sides.
That's the situation in a nutshell. And this deep dive, I think, really throws a spotlight on how these old trade rules, old diplomatic methods, they're being seriously challenged.
Yeah.
Challenged by this new digital world, new ways of creating value that just ignore borders.
Right.
So maybe the provocative thought, the thing for you to chew on is this. We're seeing this fight between two of the world's closest allies over taxing the digital economy. Can our traditional ways of doing diplomacy, of setting trade rules, actually keep up with how fast the global digital world is changing? Are we just destined for more and more of these direct confrontations, these battles over who gets to tax the virtual world?